All right, another change that's going to take place in Western Europe at the end of the post-classical period is the Renaissance. And so the Renaissance is simply this revival of art and culture and learning that's going to take place beginning in Italy. And they begin to kind of turn away from the old medieval culture. And we also see a more secular outlook. And we're going to see that in art and literature. And so the Renaissance begins in Italy. And really, for much of the Renaissance, it was confined to the Italian city states. But gradually, the ideas of the Renaissance are going to spread to the rest of Western Europe. And so we look at the values of the Renaissance. There was a lot of focus on humanism. And so the shift towards human potential and humans achieving the most that they can, that was kind of the idea of Renaissance values. And they tended to idolize classical Greece and Rome. And they use classical Greek art and architecture and kind of use that in an idealized fashion. But in some ways, they also improved upon classical art. For example, one of the things they developed was the use of perspective to make paintings seem like they had depth and more elaborate backgrounds. And so not only were they idolizing classical Greek and Roman art, but in some ways they actually improved upon classical Greek and Roman art. We're also going to see this new Renaissance spirit. And what this Renaissance spirit did was encourage change and encourage innovation and a new sense of discovery. And that's really the most important aspect of the Renaissance that's going to spread to the rest of Western Europe, because it's that sense of innovation and discovery that's going to help fuel Europe's age of exploration. And so not only does this new Renaissance spirit help fuel European expansion, but also new technologies. We're going to see key technologies spread from Asia to Western Europe. Things like the compass, which was developed in China, the astrolabe, which was actually developed in Europe. Both of those were tools for navigation. We're also going to see better shipbuilding techniques. They're going to learn to develop things like a stern post rudder and the lateen sails that made it safer and easier to travel against the wind. These were shipbuilding techniques that they learned from Asia. Also, just better knowledge of the world. Things like the wind and water currents and better maps are all going to help lead to European expansion. And so European expansion begins small and actually starts in Portugal, which seems unlikely because in reality, they weren't one of the dominant powers in Western Europe at this time. But they were a small, landlocked nation. And so as they looked to expand, their biggest option was turning to the seas. And another big reason why it starts with Portugal is government support. And that's a big difference from what we're going to see in Europe versus what we saw in China. So China turns inward, and China actually gets a head start on everybody else when it comes to this idea of exploration. But they end their voyages and the government chooses to look inward. In Europe, the opposite is true. The governments are going to support this idea of exploration and expansion. And so it begins with Portugal. Prince Henry the Navigator was a huge supporter of exploration and set up a huge navigation school so that Portugal had some of the best trained sailors and best built ships in all the world at the time. And they began small. They rediscover some islands in the Atlantic, like the Canaries, and they began to work their way down the western coast of Africa, setting up trade posts along the way. And ultimately, the biggest factor that drove this exploration was trying to find a water route to Asia, because Europe coveted all of these Asian luxury goods, silk, spices, porcelain, tea, and were tired of going through the Muslim intermediaries in the Middle East. And so they wanted those profits for themselves. And so that's what's going to drive European expansion. And Vasco da Gama is going to complete this water route to Asia. He's going to make his way all the way around Africa, reaching India and finding a water route to Asia. And so that's where we'll pick up with the next era, is with this age of European exploration and the vast changes that that's going to bring to the globe.